hi everyone. Welcome to today's session, which in today's session we are going to make puff pastry. Now puff pastry is a very simple dough. It's just consists of flour, butter, water, a little bit of salt. But it's the layering of the dough that makes it really special, and it has a lot of uses. I mean, some of you may have tasted some of these things or tried them in the past, but you can make cheese straws, cinnamon twists, palmiers, the little sugar cookies, which actually we're going to make today along with the cheese straws. Napoleons, which is also called millefeuille, which is in French means 1,000 leaves. And what that pertains to, or what that refers to, is when you're making the puff pastry, it's the layering of the dough. You're creating these hundreds and thousands of layers between the butter and the flour that gives it its flaky texture. You can also use it in things like tarte tatin or apple strudel, French apple tart. And in savory, you can use it for soup puffs. You can do beef Wellington, pigs in a blanket, wrap brie in puff pastry if you've ever seen that. Today's version, there's a couple ways to do puff pastry. Today we're doing what's called a Blitz puff pastry, or a quick flaky dough. Where there's another way to make puff pastry where you make a butter block and you fold it in the dough and enrobe it with, enclose it in the dough and roll out and make the layers. This is a little bit easier, faster way to do it, and you still get a great result from doing that. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And so what we're going to start out, I have my flour measured into my mixing bowl, and I'm going to put that on the machine. You can see my butter has been cubed and diced up, and then I chill it. You want to keep the butter cold so that in the rolling out process we're not melting the butters. That helps keep those layers and create those layers. So we're going to toss that in with the flour into our mixing bowl. Get all of it in there. And I want to take my spatula, and I'm just going to toss this around and try to coat the pieces of butter with the flour so that they stay separate. So when it, you don't want to roll out this dough and you have a big clump of butter here and a little piece of butter there. So you want to try and break it up and coat it with the flour as best you can. Okay. And for this, we're going to use a hook. Now you could mix this by hand. You could work it on the bench here or your tabletop, and that would work, but a mixer makes it a little bit easier. Okay, so I've tossed those around and got those coated well. Set my spatula aside. I'm going to put my hook on, and I'm going to drizzle the water in a little at a time. First, I'm going to actually put the salt into the cold water. I've kept this water chilled just till I'm ready to go. Again, trying to keep everything cold so that the butter doesn't get too soft at any point in the process. So I'm going to put the water in and the salt. That's all the ingredients. So we're just going to mix it till it starts to come together in what we call a shaggy mass. And what we're basically looking for is for all the water to get absorbed into the flour and the flour to get hydrated. Okay, so there you have the shaggy mass. We're going to take that off the mixer now, set our hook aside. So now we have our mixture. We're going to lightly flour our tabletop or our wood bench, just a little bit of flour to keep it from sticking. And it's always nice if you have some kind of a scraper, plastic scraper, or even what's called a dough scraper to use that helps to move the dough around. So what we're going to do is put this out on the table. And we're going to manipulate it a little bit by hand now, just to kind of bring it together. So we're gathering up all of the excess flour that didn't get mixed in. And this is why it's really important to use cold water and the butter to be cold, because right now, if I'm working this with my hands, it's going to warm up things. So then the butter would start to melt, and that would affect the layering. Okay. And don't worry about it being perfect at the beginning when you roll it out, because as we do these layerings, which is called the lamination, things will start to smooth out. The dough will start to smooth out a bit. So make sure you use enough flour so that it's not sticking on the top or the bottom. So now what I want to do is we want to take our rolling pin and start to roll this out a bit. And we're going to try and sort of get a rectangular shape, more of a long rectangular shape. If it's sticking to the rolling pin, just dust it with a little bit of flour. There's little chance you're going to over flour it, especially in the beginning. And as we get to the later stages of this, you won't need so much flour, okay? So it's always good to check to make sure it's not sticking on the bottom so that the dough is moving, okay? A little bit more on the bottom here. I want to roll it out a little bit longer. Maybe get it out to about 18 inches approximately. It's okay. And as you can see, as I roll this out, as the the pieces start to spread into the dough, and that's where the layering happens, okay? So I'm just going to smooth out these edges a little bit. So now I'm going to do the first fold, this is a three-fold, which is what in terms of if you've read about puff pastry or laminating doughs, this is called a single turn. Sometimes we'll do a four-fold, which we will probably do after we've chilled this for a bit, which allows us to roll it out a little bit more, which is more like a book fold. You bring the two ends to the middle and fold it over. That's called a four-fold or a double fold. All right? So we're going to do two folds right now, two single folds, and then we have to let it rest. Because if you try to do too many folds at once, as the butter starts to soften and gets mixed in, so you lose some of the flakiness, but also the dough starts to toughen up because we're overworked it. So the gluten and the flour and stuff starts to get overworked. So I'm just going to roll it out a little bit and do one more fold, and then we're going to wrap it up, put it in the refrigerator. Generally, you want to wait at least a half hour to let it rest and relax. It lets all those, those protein strands from the flour, that gets mixed in with the water in that to relax a bit. And you can see even now as I'm rolling it, it's starting to smooth out. We're getting less of those rough edges. You want to do your best to keep the corners as even as possible, but again, not to worry here so much in the beginning because we're just getting the layering going. All right, so I'm going to bring that over. When you do the folds, you want to try to make sure that the folds are lined up and even. That's kind of the foundation of it. So here we have two folds. So what I usually do to remind myself, and the way we used to do it in a professional kitchen, was I'll put two finger marks there. It tells me I've done two folds. In case I get busy or distracted later and I come back and say, oh, how many did I do? That tells me so I know where I left off, okay? So I'm going to take this now, put it on a sheet pan lined with paper. I'm going to cover it with plastic, and when you cover it with the plastic, you want to make sure that you cover it well so that it doesn't dry out in the refrigerator, that parts of the dough don't dry, okay? And what I generally do is take the plastic wrap and I actually tuck it. It's like tucking in the sheets on your bed. It's in there so it's covered on all sides. And we'll set it aside. We'll put it in the refrigerator for a half hour, and then we'll come back and do the next turns. All right, so it's been about 30 minutes. Our dough has rested. Now, one of the things I was just thinking of that when you do this, you don't want to let it sit at this stage much more than an hour at the most in the refrigerator, because the butter will tend to get too hard and then it's brittle, and when you try to roll it out, it'll break apart. So at this stage, now once you've finished the turns, which we're going to do right now, we're going to do 2 more turns, then the butter is fine, and it's fine to chill the dough, and at this point you can wrap it, you can freeze it, save it for later. One thing about puff pastry is you don't want to leave it in the refrigerator, you know, more than 3 or 4 days. It'll start to turn on you. So you want to, if you're not going to use it right away, you want to freeze it, okay? So again, enough flour to keep it, you know, from sticking. We're going to roll it out lengthwise. And now that we've got a little bit more of a homogeneous dough, we're going to try and roll this out a little more, maybe to about 24 inches. And we're going to do a couple of the book folds I was telling you about. Again, not rolling over the edges, pressing out from the center. Sometimes it's easy when you're rolling it out, it's easy to forget to check the bottom. But as you can see, the butter has started to kind of blend in there. It's not so prevalent, so it actually makes it easier to roll out. It's not as sticky because you don't have the butter kind of sticking out the edges of the dough. So we're going to roll that out, trying to keep the width of it even, so that when we make the layers, they're nice and even. I used to talk about it's kind of like building the foundation of a house. You want it, you know, you want things. If you do this at this point, do it right, then your puff dough will bake more evenly. All right. So I've got it almost about 24 inches. I'm going to give it a little bit more. In case you were wondering, my hands, that spread between my thumb and little finger is 10 inches. So I want to bring this over. You kind of got to eyeball it so that it's about the center. Bring this other piece over. All right, so I'm going to bring this in to even it up. One thing I do try to do is brush any excess flour off. It just allows the layers to stick together a little bit closer, you know, easier. Then fold that over. Now that's a book fold, or a double fold as we call it. All right. So now, a little more flour. We're going to do one more turn, and then that's going to be it for our puff dough to be ready to use. If when you're working with the dough, it feels like it's fighting you to let you roll it out, if it doesn't feel relaxed enough, you can just go ahead and wrap it and chill it and let it sit a little bit longer and let it rest. Because sometimes, and you can tell by the feel of the dough, it gets that elastic, you know, feel to it. As you can see, as you look close up at the dough, you can barely see the butter anymore. It's becoming more of a, like I said, a homogeneous dough. So I'm roll that out. I always feel the thickness of my dough. If it feels a little thicker at one end, I want to make sure I roll that out to get it as even as possible so that the layers are even. Okay. Lifting it up. All right, so we're going to bring this towards the center. And then bring this over. And there you have it. There's your puff pastry. Now, if you're going to use it, you want to make something the same day, I would let it rest for at least an hour or two. And again, you could wrap this at this point and put it into the freezer. If you wanted to use it another time, just take it out the day before. Or, you know, if you wanted to use this tomorrow, just refrigerate it and it'll be ready to roll out and make some of your favorite puff pastry items.